This is Maris Cooper with another capsule comment on Passions for 1960.
The anniversary of the ending of the European War, VE Day, remember it? Sure, we hollered ourselves sick at it 3 years ago.
This was and is the voice of WMRN, a radio station which in the past 2 decades has become an integral part of community life.
WMRN, Marion.
Hey, good morning and welcome to our 67th anniversary celebration. A lot of people we're going to be talking to in the next hour and a half or so. And as Scott is getting people into the studio right now, I'm going to bring in a gentleman that...
I'm with Marianne Bramble, manager of Carol's Jewelry.
Whoops.
Marianne,
Oops, there, we will come back to that. I am with a gentleman that was here when I came here as news director, Steve Stewart. Steve, good morning.
Yeah, hi, Jeff. How are you?
Hey, I'm very well, thank you.
Well, this is pretty cool.
Yeah, last time you were on was when Charlie retired. We did a little thing for Charlie.
That's right. A lot of fond memories of WMRN and working with Charlie and everybody in the mornings.
What? Now, you started here when, Steve?
You know, I was actually trying to think of that. It was the early 70s, and then I left in 1980. And this time of year always was a great time for memories for a variety of reasons. I think perhaps the one that always sticks in my head is when we had, I think it was the blizzard of 77 or 78.
Mm-hmm.
And Charlie had just purchased his very first four-wheel drive vehicle. And as you know, people who get four-wheel drive vehicles can sometimes be a little overconfident. So he said, Steve, come on, let's take a drive out. Let's take a look at all this drifting and everything. So we hopped in his four-wheel drive vehicle, and as they say, we did exactly what happens with people who have four-wheel drive. We got ourselves stuck 4 times worse than anybody else normally would. We were out in the boonies, and we were driving along. All of a sudden, there was a whiteout, and we weren't moving anymore. So we called into the station. We did a report, and as part of the report, mentioned the fact that we were stuck. And then it was probably 20 minutes later, this huge, big four-wheel drive tractor from one of the farmers who lived in the area and heard us do the report, came traveling down the road and pulled us out of the snow, and we drove along our way, and Charlie and I obviously learned a valuable lesson about four-wheel drive. And, of course, there was the Buckeye Chuck thing and the peanut push and the Kukwa Ditch Challenge. We did a lot of fun things back there. I've got a lot of great memories of my time at MRN.
You, of course, were on with John Steele. Charlie actually did the early morning, then John came on. And when I first came here, one of the things I remember was the Battle of the Kukwa. Talk a little bit about that race.
Well, you know, Charlie was kind of the old guy among us. And one of the things about the so-called old guy was the fact that he could always outplay us and outwork us. And so we were always trying to come up with some different challenges. And the challenge that John Steele and I gave him was a race along the Kukwa Ditch. It would be John and me against him, and we had canoes. And we started, I think it was on 529. The roads all blend together now, but it was in that area near Marion Technical College back then. It's the OSU campus now. And what we did is we put our canoes into this ditch that had enough water to almost get us through. But he was going to canoe it, and we were going to do it and hike it. And the first one to get down near Waldo would be the winner. And then we would have our spoils by getting these terrific, and I don't even know if they're still in business. There was a place in Waldo called the GNR Tavern.
Oh, sure.
That was well known, and maybe still is.
It still is.
Incredible fried bologna sandwiches. And so that was our treat. And, of course, as life would have it, Charlie once again beat us there. But it was a day-long event, and there were a lot of people waiting at the finish line, and, again, some great memories. We did a lot of stuff back then. If we look back today, we probably said, what the heck were we thinking when we did that?
It was a real community-oriented station, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the beauty of a station like MRN. I mean, it's all about the community. It reflects the community. We had a great time. And we did a lot of good along the way. So you can't beat those kind of combinations.
After here, you went to Toledo, and you've been at WJR now for how long?
Well, I went to Toledo, then to Columbus, and then I've been here in Detroit, going on 18 years.
Wow.
At WJR, the operations manager here, and I get down to Marion. My parents are still down there, and I've talked to Charlie a couple of times as we talked on the phone, and I've talked to John Steele a couple of times. I think he's still with the Voice of America
in Washington D.C. Right?
Yeah, it would be fun sometime for us all to get together face to face. It just doesn't seem possible that the years have passed as quickly as they have. And you were talking about when we were discussing doing this about Madge Cooper, and the fact I remember working with her. And she would do kind of the social stuff that was going on, and I would do insight and all these other things. So that was a great background, a great foundation for my broadcast career. I had a great time there.
You did insight on Tuesday nights, as I recall, and I came the first week. I had to engineer your show, and I had problems with the phones, and I didn't get people on the air, and I thought I was going to get fired on Tuesday night.
But I handled that stress pretty good, didn't I?
Well, yeah, you did. A real quick anecdote about John Steele. John, we ended up buying his house, and John moved to Washington, D.C., and about 10 years ago, we were in Washington on vacation, flipping the dial. We got a radio station, and Stephanie said, "That sounds like John Steele." Sure enough, it was. We called him the next day. He had to work on a Saturday morning after we got done sightseeing. He and his wife picked us up and took Stephanie and Brian and I out for dinner, and we went to a real nice restaurant in Washington. And I remember the waitress coming by and saying, "One check or two?" And John said, "Just one check." And I said, "No." I said, "We'll buy." And John said, "I remember what I made at WMRN, and I know what I'm making now. I'll buy your dinner." And I said, "Okay." So some things don't change a whole lot.
Well, there was Paul Van House, too, who came in about the same time, I think, as you did.
Right, follow the bouncing binky.
And, he did kind of a Google one day, and I got an email, and he said, "Is this the same Steve Stewart?" And I wrote him back, and it was fun catching up with him. And see, how all the careers kind of go off in different directions. And the one guy who originally hired me in was Ken Charles.
And I got Ken. I'm going to call Ken in about 3 minutes or so.
And so what's he doing now?
He's out in California. I don't know what he's doing, but I'll try and find out, and I'll let you know.
Well, that'll be amazing. Well, thank you for thinking of me and including me in today's show. And it was a great opportunity to have all these memories rush back into my head. And of course, you're a legend now in Marion.
Well, 18 years at WJR, you ought to be too.
Well, we do okay. But you guys are great there, and have a great day. And thanks for including me.
All right, thanks very much, Steve.
Take care.
Appreciate the call this morning. Steve Stewart, as he said, operations director at WJR, one of the great stations in the United States. He's been up there for 18 years. Going to come back. Going to talk with Ken Charles. Do that in just a moment. Ken Charles on the other end of the line this morning. And Ken, I just talked with Steve Stewart, and Steve said, "What is Ken Charles doing these days?" And I said, "I don't know. I will find out, and I'll let Steve know." Ken, appreciate you being on this morning.
Hey, no problem. It's my pleasure. I'm glad that I found out you were doing this.
Well, thanks to Gail Anderson, who I guess you've been in touch with Gail, and Gail got in touch with me a couple of days ago, said, "I think I can get Ken to call in." I said, "That'd be great."
Yeah, Gail and I go back a long, long way.
So, Ken, what are you doing these days?
Well, I'm sitting up here in the mountains, the Sierra Mountains. We bought a place up here about a year ago, so I'm retired, pretty much retired now. We have a nice little, I'd call it a cabin, up here on the river, and that's what I'm doing now. Just taking care of that. We have 9 acres, and taking care of that, and knocking around and browsing the internet and helping my son with his internet business.
Are you kind of between Sacramento and Reno, that area?
We're just an hour east of South Lake Tahoe, or west, rather, of South Lake Tahoe.
All right. Well, we were on vacation out there this summer and went to Lake Tahoe and that whole area, and beautiful area out there.
It's gorgeous. We just love it up here. So we're having a good time.
Ken, what years were you here?
I was at WMRN from 1965 to 1975. I started out as just a part-time staff announcer fresh out of the Air Force, where I had worked for the Armed Forces Radio and TV service, and eventually became program director there. And left in 1975.
So let's see. You were here then, late 60s into the 70s. You obviously remember Steve Stewart and Charlie and
Oh, my goodness,
John
yeah.
Steele and some of those people.
Well, Charlie and I, interestingly enough, I used to do the morning show. And Charlie, in those days, we had an engineer in the control room and an announcer in the booth. And so I would be in the booth, and Charlie Everest was my engineer, and he would be in the engineering control room. And so I did the morning show. But I must admit that I had to get up really early. Sometimes I would not get up quite on time, and I would ask Charlie if he could fill in for me until I got in there. What Charlie started doing so well that one time I went on vacation, and I asked him if he could just do the morning show for me. And after that, it was history. He just became a regular and eventually became farm director.
Oh, really? And you were out the door.
That's right. So, yeah, those were great times. I remember that very well.
Now, were you here when Roger Fisher was here?
Roger Fisher, I hired Roger, actually.
Okay, well, Roger's the one that hired me.
Oh, is that right? I hired Roger in to be a sports director. He replaced Bob Miller, who was, prior to him, was news director and sports director. I hired Roger in to become sports director, and he did all the play-by-play for the Harding games and the county games.
Right. And then Roger ended up, somebody wanted to know what happened to Roger. Roger ended up going to Madison, Wisconsin. He was up there for a while, and his wife was from the Bryan, northwestern Ohio area. He ended up leaving Madison, moved back to, and I haven't heard, this was years ago, but moved back to around the Bryan area, became a minister, and was a youth minister for a church up around the Bryan area.
Oh, my goodness. Life does take some interesting twists and turns.
Yeah, yes, it does. Well, Ken, again, you had a great 10-year career here or so at Marion, and after you left Marion, did you stay in radio?
No, I didn't, actually.
You got smart.
I got serendipitously into software development. I ended up out here in Silicon Valley in the video game business. I worked for Atari in 1980 and then ended up being vice president of product development at Sega when they were big in the video game business. So, again, as I say, life takes some interesting twists and turns.
I would say you made a smart decision. Well, Ken, I appreciate you getting up early out there in California and giving us a call this morning, and I'll certainly pass along your best.
Yeah, and pass along my best to Madge Cooper. I have fond memories of Madge in those days.
Oh, Madge she was just inducted into the Ohio Broadcasters Hall of Fame earlier this year.
God bless her, she deserves it, I tell you.
Yes, she does. Ken,
right.
Thank you very much for your time this morning.
All right, thanks.
Bye. It's about 29 minutes after 10 o'clock, and we're just kind of flying by the seat of our pants. But I've enjoyed talking with Steve, and I've enjoyed talking with Ken Charles. And we have some guests coming into the studio this morning. And stay with us. Again, we'll be on the air about 11:45 with our 67th anniversary celebration here on WMRN.
1490.
This is Madge Cooper with another capsule comment on passions for 1960.
The anniversary of the ending of the European War, VE Day, remember it? Sure, we hollowed ourselves sick at it 3 years ago.
This was and is the voice of WMRN, a radio station which in the past 2 decades has become an integral part of community life.
WMRN, Marion.
The founder of WMRN, Robert T. Mason, December 23rd, 1960.
2 o'clock, December 23rd, 1940. Before Pearl Harbor, before building of the Scioto Ordnance Plant, before Marion Engineer Depot, before Marion launched on a program of rebirth and rebuilding. 20 years ago, a new voice of progress appeared upon the scene, a voice dedicated to public service and community progress. This was and is the voice of WMRN, a radio station which in the past 2 decades has become an integral part of community life. While other electronic media have emphasized rock and roll or frantic and frenzied broadcasting, it has been the unswerving policy of this station to render only such substantial and intimate service as could be obtained from no other source even to recovery of lost pets or people. Thank you for your support.